All right, get ready, because we're taking a deep dive today into something I bet you use every single day, but probably don't think much about:
Hmm.
electrical standards.
Oh, cool.
We're going to try to figure out why your outlets might look totally different if you travel to another country, and we're going to do that with the help of some excerpts from a research paper
Yeah.
by a professor at the University of Illinois, Chicago.
That sounds good.
It's a really a fascinating mix of science and history and
Yeah.
some pretty intense
Oh,
rivalries.
wow. Okay. I'm interested.
Yeah, you're right. It's surprisingly captivating how something as basic as like plugging in a lamp can have a history filled with
Right.
fascinating twists and turns.
Yeah, totally.
To kick things off, let's talk about Nikola Tesla, a true visionary.
Okay.
Back in the 1860s, when electricity was still in its early stages,
Yeah.
he figured out that 220 volts of alternating current, AC, at a frequency of 60 hertz was the most efficient way to power electrical systems.
Wow.
This was especially crucial for motors, which were becoming increasingly important at the time.
Yeah. What's impressive to me is that Tesla wasn't just thinking about, individual components.
Hmm.
He was already focused on optimizing the entire system.
Right.
His research really paves the way for the modern electrical grids we rely on today.
Totally. It's a shame that his name isn't as recognized as, say, Thomas Edison's.
Yeah. Yeah.
Speaking of Edison, he was actually a big proponent of 110 volts AC.
Huh. Okay.
It makes you wonder why, when Tesla's research was pointing towards 220 volts being more efficient.
Right. Well, a big part of it was that Edison had already invested heavily in direct current DC infrastructure.
I see.
So he was naturally pretty resistant to a technology that would make his existing systems obsolete.
So basically, even brilliant minds can be a bit stubborn when their own interests are at stake. I guess that's human nature.
Yeah, I guess so.
But this difference of opinion, this is what led to the famous Battle of Currents, right?
Exactly.
Ah.
And it wasn't just like a scientific debate. It was a full-blown rivalry.
Oh, wow.
Edison went to great lengths to discredit AC current.
Really?
Yeah, he was even publicly electrocuting animals to demonstrate its supposed dangers.
No way.
Yeah, and get this, he even coined the term Westinghousing for execution by electric chair, just to associate AC with death.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah,
wow, that takes competition to a whole new level.
totally.
I mean, it makes you wonder if those tactics would even fly today.
Right.
But aside from the rivalry, I'm still curious about the technical side of things.
Sure.
Why was 60 hertz so important to Tesla?
Simply put, it boils down to efficiency.
Okay.
A 60 hertz frequency allows for more efficient generation and transmission of electricity.
Uh-huh.
This basically means less energy is wasted, and the system can handle higher loads.
So a higher frequency means a more efficient system overall.
That's right.
That makes sense. But then why did Europe go with 50 hertz and 240 volts after World War II? I mean, they were rebuilding their entire infrastructure from scratch.
Yeah.
So you'd think they'd have adopted the most efficient standard.
Well, it's a bit ironic.
Yeah.
Their decision was really driven more by aesthetics and a desire to align with metric system conventions than by, like, pure scientific reasoning.
So instead of going with what works best, they chose nice round numbers. That's interesting,
Yeah,
because it shows how sometimes even in engineering, decisions aren't always based solely on practicality.
absolutely.
Right.
And it also highlights how those seemingly minor decisions can have long-lasting consequences.
Right.
So in Europe's case, it means they require larger components,
Okay.
and their motors are inherently less efficient.
That's a fascinating trade-off and makes you realize how interconnected all these choices are.
Definitely.
But let's shift gears a bit and talk about something we interact with every day: plugs and outlets.
Okay.
Did you know that in the early days of electricity, people used light sockets for pretty much everything?
It's true. Back then, electricity was primarily used for lighting.
Yeah.
Imagine plugging your vacuum cleaner into a light fixture.
That's both ingenious and a bit terrifying.
Yeah.
It sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Uh-huh.
So when did we start seeing dedicated outlets with two-prong plugs?
That shift happened around the 1920s as the use of electricity for appliances beyond lighting became more widespread.
Okay.
And this led to the development of two-prong plugs, specifically designed for outlets, separating them from lighting circuits.
Makes sense. As
Yeah.
people started using more appliances, it would have become a safety hazard to keep plugging everything into light sockets.
Right.
But I remember reading somewhere about a split tariff system.
Mhm.
What was that about?
Ah, yes. Some electricity companies used to charge different rates for electricity used for lighting versus other purposes. Electricity for lighting was cheaper, so people would sometimes plug low-wattage appliances, like vacuum cleaners, into light fixtures to save money.
Wow, that's clever.
Yeah.
Though probably not the safest practice. But speaking of safety, when did the third prong, the grounding pin, come into the picture?
The 3-pin outlet with a grounding pin was a significant innovation,
Yeah.
driven by safety concerns.
Uh-huh.
That third pin provides a path for excess electricity to flow safely to the ground, which prevents short circuits and reduces the risk of electric shocks.
It seems like such a small addition, but it had a huge impact on electrical safety.
Yeah, for sure.
So we've covered the evolution from light sockets to two-prong and then three-prong outlets.
Yep.
But why are there so many different types of plugs and outlets around the world? You'd think there would be a universal standard by now.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But national pride played a big role in the development of electrical standards.
Mm.
Each country wanted to create its own, unique design.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, often prioritizing national preferences over global uniformity.
So instead of collaborating on a single efficient system, we ended up with this global patchwork of plugs and outlets.
Precisely. And some of these designs are pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
Take the British square plug, for example.
Okay.
It has a built-in fuse for added safety
Wow.
and shutters to prevent foreign objects from being inserted.
It sounds like they really went above and beyond with the safety features.
Yeah,
But all this variety must create quite a headache for international travelers, right?
absolutely. Imagine trying to plug in your American hairdryer in Europe.
Oh, yeah.
The voltage difference alone can be a major issue, not to mention the incompatible plug shapes.
It sounds like a logistical nightmare. So we've gone from Tesla's visionary research to the quirks of plugs and outlets, and it's clear that electrical standards are anything but straightforward.
Yeah, it's a fascinating journey through history, technology, and even a bit of national pride.
It really highlights how even the simplest things we take for granted have a rich and often surprising backstory.
You got it.
It's fascinating stuff, right? Before we got into all that,
Yeah.
we were tracing the evolution of electrical standards from Tesla's early research all the way to the curious world of plugs and outlets.
It's a wild ride.
Now let's circle back to the US and their persistent use of 110 volts.
Okay.
Seems odd that they stuck with that lower voltage for so long, especially when newer buildings utilize a split 240 volt system.
You know, it really boils down to cost and the logistics of upgrading an entire nation's electrical grid.
Yeah.
Like replacing every single wire and outlet.
Right.
Monumental undertaking.
So they're essentially stuck with a legacy system because a complete overhaul would be too disruptive and expensive. Makes you wonder if they'll ever make a complete switch.
It's a real challenge for sure, especially considering that the lower voltage can lead to some inefficiencies.
Right, those voltage drops.
Exactly. Those are way more common with a 1 in 10 volt system.
Yeah. And it's not just about energy efficiency within the US, right? I've heard that using American appliances in Europe can be a real hassle because of the differing voltage configurations.
Oh, absolutely. It's a constant reminder of those early decisions that continue to shape our electrical landscape.
Mm.
And, brings us back to the question of whether a unified global standard would have been a better approach.
It's kind of mind-boggling to think that a decision made largely for aesthetic reasons, like in Europe's case with the 50 hertz standard, could have such a significant impact on efficiency and even international compatibility.
It really it underscores how seemingly small choices can ripple through history and affect us in ways we don't even really expect.
And in this case, it means dealing with a patchwork of systems that can be inefficient and sometimes incompatible.
Exactly.
So while we're talking about historical decisions, let's talk about how modern technology might be pushing us towards a more unified future.
Okay.
I mean, with electric vehicles and smart homes and renewable energy sources, wouldn't it make sense to have a global standard for electricity?
It's a question that's becoming more and more relevant.
Right.
I mean, as those technologies you mentioned become more prevalent, the need for standardization might become, more pressing.
Yeah.
Imagine a world where your electric car could be charged anywhere, regardless of where you are.
That would be incredible.
Right. No more adapters or voltage converters.
But, I mean, achieving that kind of uniformity would require a tremendous amount of global cooperation.
Oh, for sure. It would involve overcoming historical inertia, navigating national preferences, and striking a balance between practicality and innovation.
Not an easy feat.
Wouldn't be easy, but the potential benefits are, undeniable.
It's a really fascinating dilemma.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you have the appeal of a streamlined, efficient system, and on the other, you have the challenge of getting everyone on board.
Right.
Makes you wonder if the future holds a more standardized electrical world, or if we'll continue to navigate this patchwork of systems.
And that's the beauty of these topics, right? It's not just about understanding the past. It's about contemplating the future and the possibilities that lie ahead.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Based on what we've talked about, do you think we'll see a global standard for electricity in our lifetime?
That's a tough one. I'm pretty optimistic about the potential of technology to bring people together. But history has shown us that national pride and economic interests can be powerful forces.
Yeah, for sure.
I guess only time will tell.
You're right. It's impossible to predict with certainty. But one thing is for sure, the electrical landscape is constantly evolving.
Yeah.
It'll be fascinating to see how these standards adapt and change in the years to come.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from the battle between Tesla and Edison to the quirky evolution of plugs and outlets. We even touched on the potential for a more unified electrical future.
A lot to think about.
Before we wrap things up, is there a key takeaway you'd like our listeners to ponder?
I think
Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest takeaway is that electrical standards, despite their, seemingly technical nature, are actually a product of this complex interplay of scientific principles,
Yeah.
historical circumstances, and even national preferences.
Uh-huh.
They're really a reflection of how we've harnessed and utilized electricity over time.
It's like a global puzzle,
Yeah,
where each piece represents a different approach to solving the same fundamental challenge: how to safely and efficiently power our world.
exactly. And that brings us to a final thought-provoking question for our listeners to consider.
Okay.
What does the future hold for electrical standards?
Ooh, good question.
Will we see a convergence towards a single optimal system, or will we continue to navigate this patchwork of different approaches?
Well, and it's a question that's becoming increasingly relevant as we move toward a more interconnected and electrified world.
For sure.
As we discussed, technologies like electric vehicles, smart homes, and renewable energy sources are really putting pressure on those existing standards
Yeah.
and pushing us to think about how we can create a more unified and efficient electrical future.
It's a really exciting time to be thinking about these issues. And who knows, maybe one of our listeners will be the one to invent the next groundbreaking electrical technology that changes everything.
Yeah.
Perhaps even leading us toward that, elusive global standard.
Now that would be truly electrifying. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of electrical standards.
My pleasure.
We hope you learned something new, gained a new perspective on something familiar, and maybe even sparked a few aha moments along the way.
Hopefully.
Until next time, stay curious.